It was a quiet morning in the small town of Norfolk, Virginia. The sun was just beginning to peek over the rooftops, and most people were sipping their coffee or rushing to work. In a modest cafe on the corner, a woman named Elena Hayes sat alone at a small table, her laptop open, and a notebook full of neat handwriting by her side. She looked like any ordinary woman in her early 30s. Casual clothes, hair tied back, calm and composed. But today would turn out to be anything but ordinary. No one in the cafe could have imagined what was about to happen. Without warning, a black SUV screeched to a halt outside. Doors slammed, and within seconds, several federal agents in dark uniforms burst into the cafe, shouting orders. Patrons froze in shock, spilling coffee and dropping phones in disbelief. The agents didn't waste time searching. They went straight for Elena. "Elena Hayes, you are under arrest," one of them barked. Elena stood slowly, her hands raised slightly in a gesture of compliance. There was no panic in her eyes, no frantic scrambling. She simply looked at the agents, calm and composed, as if she had been expecting this moment. Some people in the cafe whispered to each other, trying to make sense of it. Who was this woman, and what had she done to make the authorities storm in like a SWAT team raid? Outside, curious neighbors gathered, phones in hand, filming the scene. Social media would explode with videos of the arrest within hours. But at that moment, all anyone could see was a woman being handcuffed in front of a crowd, looking remarkably unafraid. The reason for Elena's arrest was shocking. She was accused of impersonating a Navy SEAL. According to the authorities, she had been posting videos online that showed her performing highly advanced military maneuvers, wearing full tactical gear, and using complex code phrases known only to elite Navy SEAL units. To most people, it seemed like a bold and audacious lie. How could an ordinary woman know the exact drills, the precise weapon handling, the secret hand signals? And why was she claiming to be one of the most elite soldiers in the world? As the agents escorted her out of the cafe, the onlookers whispered and speculated. Some assumed she must be a fraud, a social media stunt gone too far. Others thought perhaps she was some kind of undercover agent. But the truth was far stranger than anyone could imagine. Elena didn't resist. She didn't shout, argue, or panic. Instead, she walked calmly, her posture straight, her face composed. As she was led to the waiting SUV, she murmured something that barely reached the nearest agent. "You have no idea what you're doing." The words were quiet but firm, carrying a strange authority that made even the agents hesitate for a split second. Inside the SUV, Elena remained silent, her eyes scanning the surroundings, observing the agents, noticing every detail. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't anxious. Her demeanor suggested someone who was used to dangerous situations, someone who had been trained to stay calm even when facing overwhelming odds. The agents, unaware of her past, took her quiet confidence as arrogance. Meanwhile, the news began spreading. The first videos captured by bystanders went viral almost instantly. Headlines like, "Local woman claims to be Navy SEAL," and "Social media SEAL impersonator arrested," flooded social media platforms. People debated fiercely online. Was she a hero, a fraud, or something else entirely? Veterans weighed in, some dismissing her as a fake, others noticing something about her movements, her posture, and her knowledge that didn't feel fake. Back in the SUV, Elena reflected on the past few years. She hadn't intended for anyone to know. Her training, her skills, her knowledge, they were supposed to stay hidden, buried under layers of secrecy. But something had triggered the resurfacing of her abilities. Videos had been recorded without her knowing, clips had gone online, and suddenly, she was caught in a storm of suspicion and disbelief. As the vehicle drove toward the Norfolk Naval Base, Elena remained silent, but her mind raced. She knew the interrogations would be intense, the accusations harsh. Yet she also knew the truth. She wasn't pretending. Every move, every drill, every code she knew came from a place deep inside her memory, from a life she had once lived but was told to forget. The cafe was left in stunned silence. Patrons whispered nervously to each other, still unsure what had happened. The police tape went up quickly, securing the scene. phones continued recording as the SUV disappeared down the street, taking with it the mystery that had captivated the small town in an instant. To the outside world, Elena Hayes was just another person accused of lying, another case of stolen valor. But as the SUV sped through the streets, a deeper, far stranger story was unfolding. One that involved secrets, elite military operations, and a past that the world was never supposed to see. And somewhere inside that armored vehicle, Elena Hayes sat quietly, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally come out. After the SUV arrived at the Norfolk Naval Base, Elena was led into a stark, fluorescent-lit room. The walls were bare, cold, and uninviting, designed to make anyone feel exposed and small. There was a single metal table in the center, flanked by 2 chairs. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the hum of fluorescent lights added a tension that seemed to press down on her. The agents closed the door behind her, and for a moment, the silence was heavier than any accusation could be. Elena sat down calmly, folding her hands on the table as the lead investigator, Special Agent Morgan, took a seat opposite her. He was a man in his 40s, sharp eyes and a rigid posture, someone used to commanding fear and respect. He opened a thick folder full of papers, photographs, and printed screenshots from social media, and slammed it onto the table with a sharp thud. "You know why you're here," he said, voice firm but measured. "We have videos of you online. Videos showing you in full SEAL gear, performing drills, using official codes, and even simulating missions. You're claiming to be a Navy SEAL. That's a federal offense if it's false. How do you explain this?" Elena looked at him directly, her expression unreadable. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no tremor in her voice. "I'm not claiming," she said quietly. "I am. You just don't have the records." Morgan's brow furrowed. He had expected confusion, denial, maybe even fear. But not this calm, this certainty. He leaned forward. "Records? We've checked. There's nothing. No enlistment. No training logs. No discharge papers. Nothing. You don't exist in any official capacity. Every SEAL is tracked. Every SEAL is documented. You are a ghost." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes didn't waver. "Not every ghost is invisible to those who have seen it," she said. Her words were cryptic, but Morgan felt a chill. There was something in her tone that hinted at a truth he wasn't ready to face. The questioning continued. Hours passed. Morgan asked about her background, her family, her education. He asked how she had access to classified tactics, how she knew complex codes that were only supposed to be taught in secret training camps. Each time, Elena answered with precise detail, as though recalling memories buried deep inside her mind. She described maneuvers and techniques that sounded impossibly advanced for someone with no official record. Her knowledge was unsettling. She didn't just know the codes. She knew how to react in situations, how to handle weapons, how to respond under extreme stress. It was one thing to memorize phrases or motions. It was another to live them instinctively. And that instinct was what unnerved the agents most. They began exchanging nervous glances. Something about her went far beyond a simple impersonation. Morgan decided to escalate. He brought in a retired SEAL, Commander Dawson, who had served multiple tours overseas. He watched Elena carefully, testing her reactions with hand signals and tactical questions. To everyone else, it might have seemed like a game. But to those who had lived through real operations, it was a test of authenticity. Elena passed with near-perfect precision. Each response, each movement was instinctive. Dawson couldn't believe what he was seeing. Every gesture, every command, every calculation was exactly what a trained SEAL would do in high-pressure situations. And yet, by all official records, she should not have known any of this. As the day turned to evening, exhaustion began to show on the agents' faces. They had expected a simple case of fraud, maybe a social media stunt, and instead, they were staring at something they could not explain. Morgan leaned back in his chair and said, almost to himself, "Who are you really?" Elena's reply was calm, almost wistful. "Someone you forgot existed. Someone who was erased but never truly gone." The words hung in the air like a riddle. Morgan wanted to press her further, to force answers from her, but every question seemed to lead them deeper into a mystery. The more she spoke, the more they realized that this was not a case of simple impersonation. She had knowledge, skills, and instincts that suggested she had lived a life that official records had erased. By the end of the interrogation, it was clear that Elena was not ordinary. She was disciplined, intelligent, and eerily composed. Her calm demeanor, combined with the depth of her training, made the agents question everything they thought they knew. They had walked into the room expecting to catch a liar, and instead, they had found a living paradox. Someone who shouldn't exist according to the system, yet somehow did. As she was escorted back to her holding cell, whispers among the agents suggested that there was more to Elena than they could understand. Outside, the shadows grew long, and the base was quiet except for the occasional distant hum of machinery. Inside, Elena sat alone, knowing that this was only the beginning. The interrogations would intensify, the scrutiny would grow, but deep down, she knew one thing. The truth could not stay hidden forever. And somewhere, in the back of her mind, memories that were meant to be erased began stirring again, hinting at a past that even the military's records could not fully conceal. By the time news of Elena Hayes' arrest reached the outside world, it had already spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with posts, videos, and comments from people all over the country. Clips taken from the cafe and surrounding streets circulated endlessly, showing her calm composure as she was handcuffed and led away. Headlines screamed things like, "Woman arrested for impersonating Navy SEAL," and "Social media SEAL stunt gone too far." To the public, it seemed like a simple story, a bold, possibly reckless woman claiming to be something she was clearly not. But not everyone believed she was a fraud. Veterans, military enthusiasts, and even some retired SEALs began examining the videos more closely. At first glance, her uniform, her posture, and her drills could have been dismissed as theatrics. But as people studied her movements frame by frame, something unusual became obvious. Her reactions were precise, instinctive, and perfectly timed. Every hand signal, every tactical maneuver, every glance over her shoulder seemed natural, not memorized. Comments on forums and veteran groups reflected this uncertainty. Some dismissed her as an attention seeker, a social media influencer with too much ambition. Others argued that no one outside of special forces could perform with such exactness. "Look at how she handles the weapon," one commenter wrote. "Her stance, her grip, it's textbook SEAL. But how is that possible?" Meanwhile, retired Commander Dawson, the SEAL who had been brought in during her interrogation, had been watching the online chatter closely. Though he had never seen her in action outside of the interrogation room, he felt a chill as he recognized the movements and drills. "No civilian moves like that," he muttered to a colleague, almost to himself. There was a confidence in her motions, a fluency, that could only come from real training. Speculation began to grow, and rumors spread even faster than verified reports. Some suggested she had somehow infiltrated the military and learned classified techniques on her own. Others whispered that she might have been part of an off-the-books operation, one so secret that it didn't appear in any official record. These rumors gave the story a mysterious edge, and people became fascinated. The narrative shifted from fraud to possible mystery. In the town of Norfolk, her arrest had left a lasting impression. The cafe where she had been taken into custody was closed for investigation, and locals whispered about her in hushed tones. Some claimed to have seen her training in parks or small fields, performing drills alone, almost as if she were preparing for a mission that no one else knew about. Others insisted she had helped organize small rescue operations in neighboring towns, though none of these stories could be confirmed. Even within the military community, the conversation was heated. Retired SEALs and military trainers debated whether it was possible for someone to perform at such a level without official training. Some argued that perhaps she had been trained in private, an elite civilian program, but even then, the use of classified codes and mission tactics was far beyond any known private training. The debate highlighted a chilling possibility. Perhaps Elena Hayes was telling the truth, and no one was supposed to know it. For Elena, the rumors were both a blessing and a curse. She remained in her holding cell, aware of the swirling speculation outside. Every news alert, every post, reminded her that people were questioning her existence. But deep down, she felt a strange comfort knowing that some people, even if unknowingly, recognized her skills for what they truly were. Her past, though erased on paper, was leaving a trail, small signs that could not be completely hidden. By the third day after her arrest, the story had reached national news outlets. Reporters attempted to piece together her life from scant public information. Old school records, minor social media posts, and vague addresses. Yet, for every fact they found, there were 10 more mysteries. Her background seemed deliberately obscured, almost as if someone or something had scrubbed her existence from public records. The combination of official skepticism and public fascination created a tense atmosphere. Government officials, concerned about the growing rumors, began monitoring online discussions closely. They feared that misinformation could spread further, potentially compromising classified information if Elena truly had a secret military past. Meanwhile, online communities became obsessed with decoding every clip, every movement, and every word she had spoken during the interrogation videos that had leaked. People theorized about secret programs, lost missions, and even phantom SEAL units that no one had ever heard of. Among these discussions, one thing became clear. Elena Hayes was no ordinary woman. Whether a fraud or a real operative, she had captured the attention of thousands. Her calm demeanor, combined with the precise skill demonstrated in the videos, created an air of undeniable mystery. It was a story that felt larger than life, almost as if it belonged in a movie. Even the agents who had interrogated her couldn't escape the rumors. Morgan, the lead investigator, found himself checking social media updates, seeing threads questioning their judgment. Some viewers suggested that the authorities had made a terrible mistake in arresting her. Others implied that the military had erased her records for a reason, fueling the sense of intrigue. Morgan felt a growing unease. The woman he had thought to be a simple fraud might actually be something far more complicated, and far more dangerous if underestimated. By the end of the week, Elena had become a legend in the eyes of the public. People speculated about her life, her past, and her true identity. Some stories were exaggerated. Some were entirely fabricated. But one truth remained consistent. No one could explain her skills or her composure. No one could account for the instinctive movements, the knowledge, and the calm authority she seemed to carry. Even as the rumors swirled, one retired SEAL quietly remarked, almost in disbelief, "If she's lying, she's the most convincing liar I've ever seen. But something tells me she's telling the truth." And in that uncertainty, the story of Elena Hayes grew. From a simple arrest to a nationwide mystery, with whispers of secret operations, erased identities, and a woman who might be more than anyone could ever imagine. By the time Elena had spent a few days in the holding cell at the Norfolk Naval Base, the story of her arrest had become a strange mix of rumor, intrigue, and disbelief. Officials continued to study her carefully, trying to determine whether she was truly a fraud or someone who had slipped through the cracks of the system. But no matter how much they analyzed her, one small detail began to catch the attention of those around her, and it would change everything. It started when a nurse came to conduct the routine medical check that all detainees received. The nurse, a veteran of the base, had seen countless injuries, scars, and marks over the years, so she was trained to notice even the smallest details. As she examined Elena, her eyes caught a faint, faded scar near Elena's left shoulder. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary burn or an old injury, but the nurse's instincts told her it was something more unusual. The scar was not random. Its shape was deliberate, almost like a symbol, etched into the skin with careful precision. It wasn't a tattoo. It wasn't freshly made. But there was something about it, a subtle pattern, a sequence of lines that seemed familiar. The nurse, who had worked closely with military personnel for decades, felt a strange chill. She knew she had seen something like it before, long ago, in classified documents she had been briefed on during her earlier service. Without saying much, she reported it to her superior. Soon, the information reached the attention of higher-ranking officials at the base. Whispers began circulating about a special mark that appeared to be on Elena's skin. No one knew exactly what it meant yet, but there was a growing sense that it was important, something more than just a scar. The mark itself was subtle, almost invisible unless someone looked closely. But for those trained to recognize it, the pattern had significance. It was linked to a program so secret that its existence had been denied in official military history. It was known only to a few high-ranking officers and a small group of operatives who had been part of an elite, off-the-books SEAL team decades ago. This team had been involved in covert missions around the world, missions that were never documented and operatives who were officially erased from records. The mark was a symbol of that program, proof that someone had been part of it, whether willingly or by circumstance. When the report reached General Marcus Steele, a man known for his quiet authority and years of classified operations, the base was suddenly filled with tension. Steele had been out of active service for some time, but when he saw the nurse's report, his interest was immediate and intense. He didn't rush in, didn't make any announcements. He simply prepared to see Elena for himself. By the time he arrived at the holding area, the story of the mark had spread quietly among the staff, but none of the younger agents understood its significance. They watched in curiosity as the general approached Elena, studying her from a distance before finally asking the guards to allow him a private moment. Elena, calm as ever, didn't flinch or act surprised. She had been expecting this attention, though she didn't know if the man approaching her would recognize the mark. When the general finally leaned in to examine her shoulder, he paused. The expression on his face shifted subtly. First surprise, then disbelief, and finally a frozen recognition. He had not expected to see the mark in real life after all these years. The significance of the scar was immediate to him. It was not just a scar, it was a symbol of survival, of belonging to something far larger and far more secret than the world could ever know. This mark was given only to operatives who had undergone extreme missions, who had faced situations that left them unrecognized by history, yet had left an indelible mark on their bodies and souls. Seeing it on Elena confirmed something that the general had almost stopped believing in. She had been part of a mission, part of a program that had been erased from official memory. For the guards and agents who witnessed the general's reaction, it was confusing and almost unsettling. They had expected a routine examination, a quiet check for injuries. Instead, they saw a man in control of thousands of personnel freeze in recognition, as though he had seen a ghost from a past that no one else was supposed to know about. The nurse, still present, was equally stunned. She realized that her observation, initially just a minor medical note, had uncovered something extraordinary. This faint, subtle mark was proof of a story that could not be told publicly. A story of covert operations, unrecorded missions, and operatives erased from history. And now it was visible on Elena Hayes. The moment the general touched the scar, a heavy silence fell over the room. No one spoke. Even Elena, who had been calm through every interrogation and observation, remained still, her expression unreadable. She knew that the mark had been recognized, and that recognition could change everything. Her arrest, her credibility, even her fate. From that moment on, the dynamics of the investigation shifted completely. No longer was Elena just a woman accused of impersonating a SEAL. Now, she was someone who carried proof of a secret past. Proof that the authorities had overlooked, proof that only a few high-ranking individuals could understand. The story had moved from the realm of social media speculation into something real, something dangerous, and something that the world was not ready to acknowledge. As the general stepped back, still studying the mark, Elena realized that her life had changed forever. The scar, invisible to most but unmistakable to the right eyes, had revealed a truth that no argument, no record, and no social media post could ever hide. And deep down, she knew that what had begun as an ordinary arrest had now become a mystery that could not be solved by ordinary means. When General Marcus Steele arrived at the Norfolk Naval Base, the entire atmosphere changed. The guards straightened their backs, the officers spoke in hushed tones, and the air grew heavy with a mix of respect and fear. General Steele wasn't just any officer. He was a man whose reputation reached every corner of the military. Known for his cold precision and quiet authority, He was a legend among soldiers. No one knew exactly why he had come. Rumors spread quickly that his visit had something to do with the woman they were holding, Elena Hayes, the same woman accused of impersonating a Navy SEAL. Some officers whispered that he was only there to shut down the case quickly, while others thought he had personal reasons for showing up. But the truth was far more complicated. Steele had read the nurse's report about the strange scar on Elena's shoulder. When he saw the mark described in detail, his heart had skipped a beat, a rare reaction for a man who had seen everything from battlefield chaos to covert missions. That mark was not ordinary. It was something he recognized from a time long buried in classified files. He hadn't seen it in decades, and he hoped never to see it again. As he entered the base's detention wing, the sound of his boots echoed down the corridor. Guards snapped to attention as he passed, their eyes following him with silent curiosity. Steele's expression was unreadable, but his mind was racing. He had been part of a secret program years ago, one that had vanished from all records. The operatives from that program were said to be gone, either dead, missing, or living under false identities. Seeing that mark meant that one of them had survived. When he reached the room where Elena was being held, he paused at the door. Inside, she sat quietly on the metal bench, hands folded, eyes calm as ever. There was something unnervingly composed about her, as if she were the one in control, not the prisoner. Steele took a deep breath before entering. The door closed softly behind him, and the guards remained outside. For a moment, the room was filled only with silence. Steele studied her face. Strong features, steady eyes, and a faint weariness that came from years of discipline. She looked up and met his gaze without hesitation. "You wanted to see me," she said simply. Her voice was calm but carried a quiet confidence that caught him off guard. Steele didn't respond immediately. He circled the table slowly, observing her, almost as if trying to remember where he had seen her before. Then he spoke, his tone sharp but curious. "Where did you get that mark?" Elena tilted her head slightly, her eyes unwavering. "You already know, sir," she replied. "You were there." Her words hit him like a punch. For the first time in years, Steele felt his composure falter. He froze, staring at her, searching for signs that she was bluffing. But her gaze didn't waver. Her certainty was unsettling. No one outside that program should have known those words, that tone, that calm defiance. He took a step closer, his voice lower now. That program was shut down. Everyone was decommissioned. Officially, none of you existed. Elena's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. And yet here I am. The air between them grew thick with unspoken truth. Steele leaned in slightly, close enough to see the faint outline of the mark near her shoulder. When he saw it up close, his heart sank. There was no mistaking it. It was the emblem of Project Phantom, a secret branch of SEAL training designed for deep-cover missions so dangerous that the operatives were erased from all official systems. The project had been terminated years ago after a catastrophic mission overseas. Everyone involved had been declared dead. Steele himself had signed off on the final report. And yet, sitting before him, alive and composed, was one of its operatives. He whispered under his breath, almost in disbelief, "That mark's real." The words were quiet, but Elena heard them. Her eyes softened slightly, not in relief, but in recognition. For the first time since her arrest, someone finally understood. Someone finally believed she wasn't lying. Steele stood back, trying to process what this meant. If she was alive, then the entire project wasn't as buried as they'd been told. Someone had survived. Someone had managed to live with erased memories, hidden records, and a past that no one was supposed to remember. He turned toward the observation window where a few officers were watching. "Clear the room," he ordered sharply. The guards hesitated, surprised, but they obeyed. Within seconds, he and Elena were the only two people inside. Once the room was empty, Steele's tone softened. "How much do you remember?" Elena looked down at her hands, then back at him. "Enough to know who I was. Enough to know what we did." The general's jaw tightened. "Then you also know what happens to people who remember." She nodded slowly. I do. But pretending not to remember was worse. For a long moment, they stood in silence, two ghosts from the same forgotten past. The weight of the truth pressed between them. Steele knew this was no coincidence. Her arrest, the viral videos, the resurfaced instincts. Something deeper was at play, something that might expose the parts of history they had all tried to bury. Finally, Steele sighed, his face hardening again. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. You were never supposed to be found. Elena met his eyes one last time. Then maybe it's time they found out the truth. The general said nothing. He simply stared at her, torn between duty and conscience. When he finally turned to leave, his voice was steady but low. This conversation never happened. As the door closed behind him, Elena sat back, her heartbeat steady. She knew the moment he had seen the mark, everything had changed. The truth was no longer hidden, and soon it would come for both of them. The room was quiet except for the faint buzzing of the ceiling light. General Steele stood by the door, staring at Elena as if seeing a ghost from another lifetime. His heart was pounding under his uniform, though his face gave nothing away. He had faced war zones, secret missions, and life-and-death decisions, but nothing had ever shaken him quite like this moment. Elena sat still at the metal table, her hands folded neatly. Her eyes followed the general, calm and patient, as though she knew exactly what was going through his mind. Outside the interrogation room, agents watched through the glass, confused about what was happening inside. They could see the general speaking to her quietly, but they couldn't hear the words. The microphones inside the room were picking up only fragments of sound, muffled, broken, and unclear. When Steele finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. You need to tell me everything you remember. Now. Elena looked at him, her tone steady. You wouldn't believe me, sir. Try me, he replied sharply. She took a slow breath, as if deciding how much truth to share. You told me once, she said softly, that we'd all be forgotten if the mission went wrong, that no record, no name, no proof would survive. You said we'd be erased for the safety of the country. And then, it happened. Steele's eyes flickered. He remembered saying those words years ago, but he couldn't bring himself to admit it. He had buried that mission deep in classified files that even the Pentagon didn't dare touch. The operation had gone horribly wrong. Everyone had been declared dead. But now, one of them was sitting alive in front of him. How did you survive? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. I don't know, Elena answered. All I remember is fire, darkness, and waking up months later in a hospital overseas. They said I was a civilian. I didn't even remember my own name at first. But the training, the instincts, they came back piece by piece. I tried to stay quiet, but the memories wouldn't stop. And when I started training again, I remembered everything. Steele's jaw tightened. He ran a hand over his face, trying to hide the unease that threatened to show. Do you have any idea what you've done? Those videos, you brought attention to yourself. You've drawn eyes that were never supposed to look your way. I didn't plan for them to go viral, she said. But maybe it was time. Maybe people deserve to know we existed. He took a step closer, his tone dark. No one deserves to know. That's the point of Project Phantom. It never happened. You never happened. For the first time, Elena's calm cracked just slightly. Then what am I, sir? A ghost? A lie? Steele looked away, unable to answer. The truth was unbearable. He had trained her, guided her, and then signed her disappearance without a second thought. And now, standing before her, he felt the weight of that decision. Outside, the agents watching through the glass were growing restless. One of them, Agent Morgan, turned to his superior. What's going on in there? Why is he talking to her like that? Quiet, the senior officer replied. Let the general handle it. Back inside, Steele leaned closer, his voice so low that even the microphone couldn't pick it up clearly. That mark on your shoulder, he said. Do you even know what it means? Elena nodded. It means I survived something I wasn't supposed to. Steele studied her face for a long moment, then took a slow breath. His next words were barely audible, almost trembling. "That mark's real." It was a simple sentence, but it changed everything. The agents watching the live feed froze. Those who managed to catch the faint whisper through static couldn't believe what they'd heard. The general himself, the man who had led countless classified missions, had just confirmed that the mark was real. Whatever that meant, it was enough to make every person in the observation room exchange stunned looks. Within minutes, security officers began receiving new orders. Communications were cut off, recordings were deleted, and the feed from the interrogation room went dark. Files were locked under a new code, Directive 47B, a national security order reserved only for the highest-level classified emergencies. Inside the room, Steele straightened his posture again. His voice returned to its usual authority. "From this moment on, everything about you, your arrest, your identity, this conversation, disappears. You'll be transferred quietly. You'll be under new supervision. Do you understand?" Elena's eyes met his, unwavering. "So you're burying me again?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said, "You shouldn't have resurfaced, Hayes. But since you have, I have to make sure it doesn't destroy what's left of the system that created you." Elena leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but sharp. "You can erase me from your records, General. But you can't erase the truth." He froze again, their eyes locked in silence. Something inside him shifted, a flicker of guilt, maybe even respect. After a long pause, he whispered, "You were one of the best. I should have never let them erase you." The sound of the door unlocking broke the tension. 2 guards entered quietly, waiting for orders. Steele glanced back at them, then turned to Elena one last time. "You'll be moved tonight. Say nothing. To anyone." As the guards led her out, Elena didn't resist. She knew the pattern well. Quiet transfers, no paperwork, no trail. She'd lived this kind of disappearance once before. But this time something felt different. The general had recognized her, confirmed the truth, and whispered the words that could unravel everything if they ever reached the outside world. When the door closed behind them, Steele remained alone in the room. He looked down at the empty chair where Elena had been sitting and exhaled heavily. The ghosts of his past were no longer buried. One of them had come back to life, and he knew that nothing could stay hidden forever. Outside, in the silent hallway, Elena walked steadily between the guards. Her mind was calm, but her heart raced. She knew the moment the general whispered those words, a storm had begun. One that even he couldn't stop. That night, the base was unusually quiet. The hallways were dim, the guards were alert, and the air felt heavy with secrets. Elena was moved from her holding cell to a hidden underground section of the base, a place only a few people even knew existed. Her wrists were no longer cuffed, but 2 armed soldiers walked closely behind her, their eyes never leaving her. As she walked, memories flickered in her mind. Cold training rooms, coded messages, and long nights in the desert where silence was more dangerous than gunfire. She remembered the mission that had changed everything, the one that had erased her name from existence. It had been called Operation Viper, but that name had been wiped from every military record. They reached a small, dimly lit room deep beneath the base. Inside, General Steele was waiting, standing beside a metal table covered in old files and a single laptop. He looked different now, less like a commanding officer, more like a man who had finally run out of places to hide. "Sit down," he said quietly. Elena obeyed. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The hum of the air vent was the only sound in the room. Then Steele slid one of the folders across the table. The paper was old, its edges yellowed and stamped classified, Level 7. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Elena stared at the file. Her throat tightened. "Our records," she said slowly. "Project Phantom." Steele nodded. "The ones that were never supposed to see daylight again." He opened the file. Inside were photographs, black and white images of young soldiers, faces half-lit by harsh lights. Elena saw herself among them, younger, in a black uniform, eyes cold and focused. There were others too, men and women she had trained with, laughed with, and watched die in silence. As she flipped through the pages, she saw the mission logs, infiltration notes, coded briefings, and casualty lists. But then she noticed something strange. Her name was marked Kia, killed in action. Underneath it, in small letters, was a date she would never forget. "I was alive," she whispered. "You knew." Steele's expression didn't change. "I suspected," he said. "But confirming it would have meant reopening everything, releasing data that even I didn't have clearance for. It was easier to let the world think you were gone." Elena's eyes burned. Easier for who? For me, who woke up with no identity? Or for you, who didn't want to face the truth? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened another folder. Inside were documents marked with red lines and strange symbols. He tapped one of them. "You weren't just a soldier, Hayes. You were part of an experiment." Project Phantom wasn't about creating elite soldiers. It was about creating erased ones. Soldiers who could disappear without a trace, even from their own government. Elena frowned. "What do you mean?" Steele looked her straight in the eyes. "They erased your data at a biological level. DNA records, medical files, fingerprints, everything was altered. You could walk into a federal database today, and it would show you don't exist. You're a living ghost." The words hit her like a wave. She had always wondered why even basic systems didn't recognize her. Why her fingerprints never matched. Why her name triggered silence instead of results. Now she understood. "Why would they do that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Steele sighed. "Because ghosts can go places no soldier can. You were trained to disappear, to infiltrate places no one could trace you to. But after Operation Viper failed, they shut it all down and erased the survivors to cover their tracks. You were supposed to be one of the casualties." Elena shook her head slowly. "But I lived. Doesn't that mean something?" "It means trouble," Steele said grimly. "If the truth about Phantom comes out, it won't just be you they come for. It'll be me and every officer who ever signed off on it. This program was buried for a reason." Elena leaned forward. "So what now? You hide me again? Pretend none of this happened." He hesitated. "That's one option. The other is to tell the truth and start a war inside the walls of our own system." The silence stretched between them, heavy and tense. Elena's heart raced. She remembered her teammates, the ones who never made it back. She remembered their faces, their voices, their promises. "They deserve to be remembered," she said finally. "We all do." Steele looked at her for a long moment, the weight of guilt deep in his eyes. "Do you think anyone will believe you? The world has moved on. People like you are shadows. They talk about heroes, not ghosts." "Then I'll be the ghost that speaks," she replied. For the first time, a faint smile crossed the general's face. Sad, but filled with respect. "You haven't changed," he said quietly. "Still the same stubborn soldier who wouldn't follow orders." Elena smirked slightly. "Maybe because some orders were never right." He nodded, then slid a small flash drive across the table. "This has everything, proof of Project Phantom, mission details, your real file. If you take this, there's no going back. Once it's out, the world will know. But you'll never be safe again." Elena stared at the drive. Her fingers hovered above it. For a moment, she thought about the quiet life she could have had if she just stayed hidden. But then she thought about the others, the forgotten names, the erased soldiers who never got the chance to tell their stories. She took the drive. "They erased me once. I won't let them do it again." Steele exhaled slowly, a mix of pride and fear in his eyes. "Then may God help us both." Outside, the hum of the bass grew louder. The truth that had been buried for years was finally starting to surface. And somewhere deep inside, Elena knew that once she walked out of that room, nothing would ever be the same again. The night outside the base was calm, but inside, everything felt like it was about to explode. Elena sat in the back of a dark military van, the small flash drive hidden inside her sleeve. Two soldiers sat across from her, their faces unreadable. She could feel their eyes on her, but her mind was far away. She kept replaying General Steele's words in her head. "If you take this, there's no going back." She knew he was right. What she had now wasn't just a file. It was the truth. Proof that Project Phantom had existed. Proof that soldiers had been erased, experimented on, and used for missions no one would ever admit happened. If the world saw what was on that flash drive, everything would change. The van drove through the quiet roads of the base until it stopped outside a private hangar. Steele was already there, waiting beside a small black helicopter. The wind from the blades whipped through the air, blowing dust and loose papers around them. He stepped forward as she climbed out of the van. "This is where we part ways," he said. Elena nodded slowly. "What happens to me now?" He looked at her for a long time. "Officially, you'll be transferred to another facility for debriefing. But unofficially," he hesitated, glancing at the soldiers nearby, "they'll try to make sure you disappear again. For good this time." Elena's eyes narrowed. "You're warning me? I'm giving you a head start," he said quietly. Before she could respond, he slipped a folded piece of paper into her hand. It had coordinates written on it. "Go here. There's someone who still owes me a favor. You'll be safe for a while." "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. Steele's expression was heavy. "Because I helped create this mess. And maybe this is my way of fixing it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Steele leaned closer, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's roar. "Be careful who you trust. They'll come for that drive." With that, he stepped back, giving her a final nod. The helicopter door closed, and Elena climbed inside. As it lifted off the ground, she looked down through the glass and saw the general watching her, his face fading into the distance. The flight was long and quiet. Elena sat in silence, staring out at the dark horizon. Every few minutes, she felt the weight of the flash drive pressing against her arm, reminding her that she carried something dangerous, something powerful. When the helicopter landed hours later, it was at an abandoned airstrip surrounded by mist. She stepped out, looked around, and spotted a small cabin in the distance. She walked toward it, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. Inside the cabin, a single light was on. A man in his 50s sat at a desk, his face half hidden in shadow. When he looked up, his eyes widened slightly in recognition. "You're one of Steele's ghosts," he said. Elena stopped a few steps away. "He said you could help me." The man nodded. "Name's Harper. I used to work in intelligence before they buried me under a fake retirement file." He motioned for her to sit. "If Steele sent you, this must be serious." She pulled out the flash drive and placed it on the table. "This holds everything. The missions, the training, the disappearances." Harper stared at it for a long time, then gave a low whistle. "You know, if this gets out, it could tear the military apart." "I'm counting on it," Elena said simply. Harper looked impressed. "You've got guts, kid. Most people would run." "I did run," she said quietly. "But not anymore." Harper connected the drive to his old laptop. The screen flickered to life, lines of coded text appearing, followed by photographs and mission files stamped top secret. As the files opened, Harper's expression changed from curiosity to shock. "Oh my God," he whispered. "They wiped entire teams. They changed identities, altered medical data. This isn't just erasure, it's rewriting history." Elena watched the screen, her hands clenched. "Now you see why they locked me up." Harper leaned back. "If this goes public, people at the top will fall. But they'll do anything to stop that from happening." "I know," she said. "That's why we have to be faster." They spent the next few hours transferring the data to a secure server, setting up encrypted channels to leak the information safely. Harper moved with the precision of someone who had done this before. Elena stayed alert, checking the windows and keeping her weapon close. Just before dawn, Harper looked up. "It's done. Once the sun rises, the files will start going live on independent networks. They'll spread faster than anyone can stop them." Elena nodded, her chest tight with emotion. "Then it's over." But Harper shook his head. "No, it's just beginning." Moments later, a loud rumble echoed outside. The cabin lights flickered. Harper froze. "They're here," he said. Elena grabbed her weapon and ran to the window. Black SUVs were pulling up near the cabin, their headlights slicing through the fog. Armed men in tactical gear poured out, surrounding the place. She turned to Harper. "Can you finish the upload?" He nodded quickly. "It's 90% done. Just buy me a minute." Elena moved to the door, taking a deep breath. Her training kicked in calm, focused, unstoppable. As the first team approached, she opened fire, hitting the ground near their feet to push them back. Bullets struck the cabin walls, with splintering around her. Harper shouted, "Done! It's out!" Elena smiled slightly. The truth was finally free. "Then it's time to go," she said, grabbing Harper's arm and running through the back exit. They sprinted toward the trees as the cabin erupted behind them in gunfire and smoke. Hours later, far from the chaos, Elena stood on a hill overlooking the sunrise. Her clothes were torn, her body bruised, but her spirit unbroken. She turned on a small radio she had taken from the cabin. The morning news was already spreading. Leaked files exposed secret military project known as Phantom. Sources claim it involved creating soldiers erased from all records. Elena smiled faintly, tears glinting in her eyes. For the first time in years, the truth was no longer buried. Somewhere miles away, General Steele listened to the same news broadcast in silence. A small, tired smile crossed his face. "You did it," he whispered. And for the first time, both of them knew the ghosts had finally been seen.